Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV. Over the last couple of years, smartphones have gotten very stagnant in that we didn't see a lot of creativity in their overall designs, but we're starting to see some changes with foldable devices. And the other day, Google sent me their latest phone, the Pixel Fold, to review. And on the surface, this looks like a nice compact smartphone, but if you open it up, you get a nice larger display here. And they've got a lot of creative ways that they make use of this dual display phone here. We're going to explore what this phone is all about and look at it largely from a consumer perspective. What can the average user get out of something like this? And we'll look at a few different scenarios as we go through all the things that this phone can do. But I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that this came in free of charge from Google. However, they are not reviewing or approving what you're about to see before it is uploaded. They are not sponsoring this video, and all the opinions you're about to hear are my own. So let's get into it now and see what this foldable phone is all about. Now, the price point on this is rather ridiculous, coming in at $1,799. I was looking around though, and it looks like the Samsung Z Fold, which I would consider to be this phone's kind of primary competitor, is also being sold for that price unlocked. There might be carrier promotions out there that might bring the price down a bit, but expect to pay a lot more for this phone versus one of your standard candy bar configuration phones that don't fold out. So just be aware of the price going into this. It is exorbitant, but we're going to look at it anyhow because I think it is a cool design that I hope gets into lower cost devices rolling forward. Now, inside, this phone is powered by Google's Tensor G2 processor. That's the same chip that's on all of their other current phones, including the entry-level Pixel 7a. The Fold, though, has 12 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage. There is no SD card slot for upgradability, although they do have a model with more onboard storage for more money if you want to go that route. I would have liked to have seen some SD card expansion, but I don't think any of the Pixel phones currently offer that. The displays, as you can imagine, on this are very, very nice. So on the front display here, let me unlock it again, you've got a 5.8-inch display that's running at 2092 by 1080. It's an OLED, so you get nice deep blacks and really nice contrast ratios. And it runs at 1200 nits of brightness at 120 hertz for its refresh rate. So a very nice high-end smartphone screen here on the front, of course, glass as well. And one of the things that I like about this phone is that it is very compact. I don't like large phones, and this really appeals to me because it is something that you can fit in your pocket. But what's nice about it is that when you unfold it, you get the nice larger display here, almost like a little mini tablet. Pretty much it is a mini tablet, I guess. And this is a 7.6-inch display inside. It is also OLED, running at 2208 by 1840. It runs slightly dimmer at 1000 nits. I don't really notice the difference between the front and the back, but it's also 120 hertz for its refresh rate. So you get a very similar experience when you're unfolded and folded as far as the displays are concerned. There's not a lot of compromise here on them. They say this is running with a very thin layer glass that allows the screen to bend here, as you can see. I haven't found any issues unfolding and refolding the phone over and over again. I've been using this quite a bit over the last week or so and haven't noticed any deterioration of anything. It is starting to pick up some fingerprints and dust. They do recommend you really try to keep dirt and other things like sand out of the screen because it can get damaged as you fold it back in here. The one thing that I haven't been able to unsee over the course of my ownership of the phone here is that there is a pretty big crease here down the middle. And a lot of people say you get used to it. I guess you kind of get used to it when you're watching movies or something like that, but every time I hold the device at a slight angle, I see it. Another issue I've run into with it is that I don't feel like the phone is going as flat as it should be. So the right-hand side of the phone is just slightly more angled than the left side, so I'm seeing that as well when I am reading on the screen or doing things where my eyes are focusing more on specific details versus watching a movie. So it's not perfect, but it does feel pretty sturdy, and the hinge feels just as good now as it did a week ago. And I will say, for the most part, when I'm watching a video or something, I don't really notice the crease all that much, but it is there, and it's something that is just normal for this technology at the moment. So if you get this and see a big crease down the middle, that's what it's supposed to look like, and it's common across other foldable devices as well. Now, the build quality on this feels spectacular. It better for the price point. It's got a nice heavy feel. It weighs 10 ounces or 283 grams without a case. So it's got just a nice dense feel. When you pick it up, it feels solid. And I think it helps that it's so compact here as well. It's not all that thick, as you can see here either. So although it is thicker than perhaps your average flagship smartphone, it's not all that much thicker. And again, I just really like the pocketability of this and just how it feels in my hand. On the back here, it does support wireless charging, so if you have a Qi charger, it will work with that. And of course, you can see its massive camera bump here on the rear. Now, as far as carrier compatibility is concerned, it should work across all of the US carriers. It is, of course, a 5G phone and supports the ultra-wideband frequencies as well. Not much for ports on it. You just have a USB-C port here at the bottom for charging and data devices. Like other Pixel phones, it does not support video output, although you could mirror to a Chromecast device instead. There's also a nano SIM card tray here above the USB-C port, but they also support eSIMs, so you could have two SIM cards essentially in here, one physical card and one version. And on the side here, you've got a power switch which has a built-in fingerprint reader. It is very quick to get you in. I've never had a false read with it either, so it's pretty good at recognizing your finger. It does support facial recognition as well if you want to go that route. And then you have a volume rocker here. There is, though, no headphone jack on this phone, like many other phones these days, so you'll have to connect up Bluetooth headphones or a USB-C headphone adapter at the bottom. Now, it does have stereo speakers on board, and in most orientations, you will hear stereo separation in your audio. So right now, I've got it flipped out. We have a speaker here on the top left and another one down here on the bottom right. And when you flip it around this way, you've got them on each side of the unit here. It sounds pretty good. When you have it in landscape mode while it's folded up, those speakers are on the left and the right here as well. But when you've got it in a vertical orientation folded, you're going to hear sound out of the top and bottom. So there's only so many ways you can get stereo to work on this. But overall, the speakers sound nice and about what you would expect out of a phone this size. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I like very compact phones, ones that I can fit in my pocket. And although they work great for most of the things that I do with my phone, there are some things like looking at desktop-sized web pages that often get to be difficult. So this is my RSS reader that I use for keeping up on all sorts of topics. And as you can see here, things are very small, both in the portrait mode here, but also here in landscape. And one of the fun things I've been doing with this phone is opening it up and getting a much more usable experience here, basically being able to have a workable version of the desktop site on my phone. So when I need to get a little more screen real estate, I don't have to pull out a tablet to do it. I can just unfold the phone here and have at it. And that's been something I've really gotten a lot of utility out of on this phone so far. Unfortunately, there is no way to smartly detect what mode the phone is in on these web browsers, so I would love it to switch from the phone version on the front screen and then have it reorient itself as the desktop version when you open it up. But it's easy enough to just go in and change that setting manually. But I've been very pleased with being able to have something in my pocket that has enough screen real estate to make my RSS reader here functional. Now, some of the Google apps can recognize that they're running on a Pixel Fold and offer some quality of life improvements. So right now we're looking at my YouTube channel here, and if I flip the screen around, I get a larger version of the video, but it cuts off a little bit below the halfway mark. But if I wanted to set the phone down, what I could do is start folding it up here, and when I get to about here, as you can see, it nudges everything up a little bit. Let me do that again. There's the nudge. And I could put the phone down here, and the video basically cuts off right where the fold begins. So I can use this as like a little stand when I'm on a plane or something, and I can control all the video from the lower portion of the screen here without having the top part scroll away. The only problem I've got is here at the top, because this top portion here where you get the Wi-Fi and the battery indicator isn't going away. But I like where they're going with this, and I'm sure they could very easily fix that in future software updates. And this is the kind of very subtle quality of life feature that you might find on a few other Google apps as you're playing with the Fold here. It'll recognize that it's running on a Fold and look for that turn of the screen to know to reorient the screen slightly. Now, most of the apps that I've run on here do recognize the larger screen, even if they were not written specifically for the Fold. And there's also a way that you can have apps running side by side. So right now I have Google Docs opened up here, but if I pull up my taskbar here from the bottom and select Google Photos, I can drop that onto the right-hand side of the screen. And as you can see now, I've got basically two phone-sized windows here side by side. And you can also do some cool stuff like drag and drop. So here I've got a photo in Google Photos. I can bring it into my Google Doc and drop it right in. You can also do this with Gmail as well. So hopefully more developers take advantage of some of this drag and drop functionality, because it's pretty handy to have two apps open side by side and move data back and forth between them. But I have encountered apps that don't work well with the large screen. One of them, for example, is Reddit. So right now it is running here kind of in the center, and it's not taking advantage of all the screen real estate we have. What you can do, though, is tap on the portions of the screen that are blank, and it will move the app over. And of course, I could run another app next to it side by side on the larger screen here, so I could pull in my web browser, for example. So there are some things that you can do here with the apps that don't support that, but of course, it's nicer when they do. Now, the camera system also benefits from all of the different configurations this phone can operate in. Now, you do have cameras all over the place. So you've got one here when you are unfolded. You also have a camera here for when you are folded. But think about this. You've got a screen here that is forward-facing along with the rear cameras when you have it folded out. And they thought of that. So if you hit this button here and click on Switch Screens Now, what'll happen is your rear cameras become front-facing selfie cameras. And because these rear cameras are much higher quality than the ones that are typically used for selfies, you can take some really high-quality selfie photos and videos by putting the phone into this configuration and switching the screens around. You basically get full access to all the features of the rear camera, yet you can get yourself aligned properly by looking into the screen here. It's a really cool feature and something that this phone lets you do, because you do have a screen that's facing the same direction of the rear cameras when you fold it out. Let's take a closer look now at all the different cameras on this device and what the output quality looks like. Now, on the back of the phone here, there are three cameras. One is an ultra-wide that runs at 10.8 megapixels and a 2.2 aperture. There's also a telephoto lens that also runs at a 10.8 megapixel resolution with a 3.05 aperture. And then there is the moneymaker lens, the 48 megapixel standard one that runs at a 1.7 aperture, which is where I think you'll be spending most of your time. Now, I stood up on my deck earlier and shot a photo from the same spot with all three cameras. This is the ultra-wide, this is the standard lens, and this is the telephoto. So you can see just how far that telephoto lens gets in. But because the telephoto lens has a 3.05 aperture, it's going to do the worst in low light situations, whereas the 48 megapixel sensor will do the best in low light because it has such a wide aperture on it. Now, this photo here was taken with that 48 megapixel standard lens. Lots of nice detail here. My dog was in motion. She never sits still for a photo, so it was nice that it could pick up some detail here even though she was moving around. You can see a little bit of softness on the eye there because she was moving pretty quick there. This is a photo of my friend's new puppy. This was taken with the portrait mode, and you can see we got a lot of nice detail here with an animal that was holding still and behaving better than my dog was. Really nice quality images out of this. Here's another portrait photo of my daughter eating a cupcake. You can see all the cupcake in her teeth there, but it's just spectacular. Every image I've taken with the camera does exceptionally well. And what's really neat about this is that you don't necessarily need to use that portrait mode all that much. So for example, this was a photo I took with the 48 megapixel camera in its regular camera mode. And if I zoom in a little bit on the flower, you can see we get a ton of detail here, along with a nice, beautiful, natural bokeh. This is not some digital effect. It is naturally blurring out the image here, because the aperture on that lens is only 1.7. So you get a nice, natural, undigital depth of field out of that camera. It even works in the video mode. So this was taken at a 4K 60 resolution out of that same camera. And as you can see here, we've got some nice detail in the front. We even have some foreground blur, and we can shift perspective to the person walking on the beach there and then shift back again. So a lot of potential in this camera without having to enable any digital effects to get something really nice out of them. And if we go back here, this is actually another photo I took with the telephoto lens outside. Although its bokeh is not as nice as what we saw out of the standard lens, we're still getting a good amount of natural bokeh here, along with some really good detail. And one of the things these Google phones do is they apply a lot of software processing on the fly while you're taking the pictures. So you get some really, really nice images out of this thing without having to futz around too much after the fact. Now, like that YouTube example I showed you earlier, when you move the display about halfway up when it's unfolded, the phone here will transition into what they call tripod mode. So you have your camera image here on the top portion of the screen and the controls on the lower portion, and you can adjust the angle of the camera to get what you're looking at and then start the photos from here at the bottom. And this works really well for the astrophotography mode that requires a 4-minute exposure of the sky to work. So you can get the camera set up here, get it all nice and stable, hit the button, and you'll have a stable surface here to work from without having to set a tripod up. And this was a photo that I took from my back deck last night. Isn't that cool? And we got a little bit of the Milky Way in here. We even got a satellite or a meteor coming through and an airplane over here. And you can do this very easily with this phone because, again, you don't need a tripod to do it. Another cool thing is that when the photo was taken, it also gave me this little video of the time it had taken the exposures with. So you can see that airplane going by and that satellite or meteor zipping by too. Unfortunately, this is as long as it is, about 2 seconds, but it was still kind of a nice surprise to have a little bit of a video to accompany my photo here when it was done. Now, as far as the front-facing cameras are concerned, your weakest one is this one here when you are unfolded. It is only 8 megapixels. It only shoots 1080p video at 30 frames per second, so it is a bit more limited. The camera on the front when you are folded up is 9.5 megapixels and can shoot 4K 60 frames per second video. This photo was taken in portrait mode of that folded up front-facing camera, the higher resolution one. It looks pretty nice. And this is from the other forward-facing camera when you are unfolded, the lower resolution one. The higher res one does look a little bit better, I suppose, but both are fine. And I think that interior camera was not so much an afterthought, but mostly there to accommodate people looking to do conference calls and that sort of thing. I think if you have the phone unfolded, flip it around and make use of those rear cameras, you're going to get significantly better images out of those than you'll get even out of the nice selfie camera here in the front. Now, you can buy a lot of Steam Decks for what one of these Pixel Folds will run you, but they do play games quite well. I ran a bunch of games from the Android App Store, including this one called Horizon Chase. Everything ran fine, everything looked great, and it's a lot of fun to play some of these mobile games on a larger display, but of course have the option to play them on a smaller one too when you fold it up. Some of the games don't do so well when you go from one configuration to the other, so sometimes you might have to leave the game and go back in, but by and large, a very nice Android gameplay experience. Let's take a look now at retro gaming because we've got a nice square display here. So if you were curious how a Sega Genesis game, for example, might look on this display, here you go. It's not quite a 4x3, so you do have a little bit of letterboxing at the top and the bottom, but it certainly looks like it fills most of the screen up here. And of course, you've got the 120 hertz refresh rate, so these high frame rate games like this one look and play great on this. And of course, you can pair up your game controllers. Let's take a look now, though, at something a little more demanding. So we are running now a PlayStation 2 emulator called Aether SX2, and we're playing one of my favorite games of all time called Burnout Revenge. And this game is not quite running at full speed. We're doing about 40-ish frames per second when it normally runs about 60. So this kind of represents the limit as to what you can emulate on here, although I think some of the older PS2 games that may not push the envelope as much as this one does should run a little better. I have found on the GameCube side in some prior testing that we could also get some of the simpler GameCube games to run at full speed. The more demanding titles might stress it a little bit more, but overall, I think pretty good emulation performance out of it. But for the price point, you can certainly do better for far less money with another device with a faster processor. And on the 3D Mark Wildlife benchmark test, we got a score of 1,625 on the extreme version of that test and 6,797 on the regular version. That is pretty much within the margin of error with what we saw on the Pixel 7 Pro that Google sent to us to review a few months back. I haven't tested the Pixel 7a yet, which is the entry-level Pixel phone, but it has the same processor as the Pro and the Fold, so I would imagine that entry-level device will perform equally to the more expensive ones, at least when it comes to gaming. But take note of the iPhone 14 Pro on that list. Apple's processors for gaming are light years beyond most of their competition that's out there, and this test really is good evidence of that performance difference. So if you could install emulators on the iPhone, I think you would see better performance with that PlayStation 2 emulator and others out of the iPhones just because their processors are so much quicker. But I think Google has focused on the things that people do with their phones, and so a lot of the guts of this processor are focused on photo and video processing as opposed to gaming, which I don't think they see as a primary use case for their phones. Now, putting its high price tag aside for a second, I have to say this phone is pretty darn awesome. What I like most about it, as I mentioned earlier, is that it is so compact and pocketable, if you will, yet you can unfold it and get so much more screen real estate to work with. And I guess this is a function of other foldable devices too, but this is the first foldable device that I've had any significant time with, and I love it. I am sold 100% on these foldable designs, and I hope to see a lot more of them. That said, the implementation here is not perfect. It certainly has a visible crease that is always there. A lot of you said I would get used to it when I did my unboxing last week. I haven't. I still see it all the time, a little less so perhaps when I'm watching a video or something, but it's going to be there, and if that bothers you, just be prepared for that. But I'm able to get by that given the added utility of this foldable design. Another thing, again, as I noticed on mine, is that it's not quite opening up completely flat, so it does look like a portion of the screen is angled slightly differently than the other. And I'm not sure if that's a function of all of these units or perhaps something unique to mine, but those are the things that bug me about it. And of course, its high price tag is definitely prohibitive. One other thing to note before I close out here is that because this is a more square display, when you've got a 16:9 video running, you will have some pretty big black bars here on the top and bottom. And that's just a function of having something this compact. You can't really open it up and get something wider like that. But beyond that, I think this is a really cool phone, and I would love to see the price come down on this, and I'm really eager to see what a Gen 2 will look like given how good this first generation attempt is. That's going to do it for now. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Brian Parker, Chris Allegretta, Hot Sauce and Video Games, Logic KGR, Tom Albrecht, and Amda Brown. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.